We're so grateful for all of you that have come out this evening to join us in this celebration of the life and the legacy of Flora Hommel. I did want to acknowledge a few VIPs. In particular, I wanted to be sure that I acknowledged my boss, Dean Sandy Yee, the Dean of the University Library System, and also glad to see others here. We'll have some speakers that I'll introduce separately in a moment. It was a question that people asked me. I've also have to acknowledge Louis Jones, our field archivist, who's been very active in organizing this event. There is a biography in your program that will help you to understand the importance and significance of Flora Hommel's life if you're not closely familiar with her, although I think I'm speaking to an audience that knows her very well. There were questions, though, as why was this event to be held at the Reuther Library? And I will avoid any bad jokes about labor. I promised that I wouldn't do that tonight. And I think that's because people think of the Reuther Library as a labor collection. We are a repository, an archival repository. We collect records of organized labor in North America. Many people don't realize, though, that we're an active collector in other areas. We have really 3 collection areas, labor being only one of them. We are actively engaged and interested in the history of metropolitan Detroit, particularly social activism, social welfare, civil rights issues in the Metro Detroit area. And we also, not surprisingly, have an active collection about the history of Wayne State University. And so with those 3 collecting areas, we often have areas of crossover and intersection, and Flora Hommel's a good example of that. Very often people bring in materials to us or suggest things that we should go and look for, and it's not easy to always slate them as being labor or metropolitan Detroit or university history. And so it's nice to have you all here in an archives facility to understand that people's lives have impacts in lots of different areas, and Flora Hommel is certainly one of those. She is an actual alumna of Wayne State University, so from the School of Nursing here. And so that brings her within the realm of our university records collection. But I think our collections also cross over in lots of areas, particularly in medical history here in the Detroit area. Things that have to do with Wayne State University and its programs of nursing and medicine, but also people active in this community, interested in welfare issues. Flora Hommel, again, bridging that gap with a very active interest in women's issues, the issues of mothers, issues of family and community. And so it's very nice, and we're very honored that we actually have a collection of Flora's papers here, 26 linear feet of records. People often ask, okay, what does an archive do? And we do collect things, so those papers are part of what we do, and so having Flora's papers here is useful for people that want to answer questions about things that happened in history. They can come and look at those records. They also, though, become a magnet, an attraction for other collections. And I made a short list here, papers of the Reverend Charles Hill, papers from Ernest Goodman, who was with the Lawyers Guild, papers from Rudy Simons, a number of people who, outside of the Lamaze Childbirth Method, interacted with Flora as a social activist in this community, in this region, nationally and internationally. And those people who we might bring into our collections as civil rights leaders or social activists, they have a very direct involvement as well with the story and the life and the legacy of Flora Hommel. So we're really glad that you're here. And really glad that you can help us celebrate this. We're also not just about creating collections. We're about facilitating access and encouraging research. And so part of what happens with these kinds of events is it helps us to tell the world, yes, these resources are here, they are being used, and we want them to be used again. I was reminded that Flora's work has been highlighted by Jacqueline Wolfe, probably the best known scholar in the area of obstetrics and women's health issues. We also just had contact from Professor, I'm trying to remember her name now, Paula Michaels, who is doing this similar type of research, this similar sort of work all the way down in Australia. and wants to come up to Reuther to access these records so that she can understand not only what Flora's work was here, but how that's reflected in work that was done really literally on the other side of the globe. So these are indeed international outreach tools that we use. And so it's great for us to have the opportunity to celebrate not only the records that we collect as an archives, but the impact and the stories that are told through those records. So thank you very much. I would be remiss if I didn't point out another person here, Marguerite Carlton. She's probably stepped out, but you know, just as the work that we do in collections helps us to get more collections, things that you do in helping to support the Reuther Archive also help us to do the work that we can. So there are opportunities for you to remember Flora with a financial gift if you'd like, and I know that Marguerite would be glad to talk to you about other aspects of supporting what we do here at the Reuther Library and encouraging that type of collection and research. But I also know that you didn't come tonight to hear me talk. So I will get on with it, and we have a group of speakers here, and I will introduce them one by one, and then we'll let them come up and make some remarks. When we were planning this event, we had indications of a variety of VIPs who may attend and participate in this event. Some of them were unable to come. We were probably most let down because we were expecting a visit from Barbara Levin, who actually knew Flora Hommel personally and used the Lamaze Method in the delivery of her own children. And unfortunately, she was not able to be here tonight, but she sent a stand-in. And so without further ado, I'd like to introduce our former U.S. Senator, Carl Levin, who would like to make a few comments.
Believe me, not the first time that I've stood in for Barbara. However, a lot of people who have heard her speak in my place, she was standing in for me, told me they don't care if I ever show up again. They're stuck with me, basically. I was thinking of all the labor jokes that I was going to give tonight, but, and then I was going to say you stole my thunder, but unhappily you decided not to provide some of the humor, which is possible. So, connection, as a matter of fact, I'm sure in a lot of ways between the two themes. Barbara wrote some remarks for tonight, and she wanted to be here. She's still in Washington. We're trying to figure out how to get stuff from 4 different locations into our new place downtown. We've always lived downtown since we were in the Senate. We've had an apartment downtown, but now we want a bigger place because we're moving down here full-time. We finally found a bigger place. Happy to say it's tough to find the right kind of places now in Detroit that fit your needs because there's such a demand. Right in this area is a perfect example of it. And that's a great, fairly new trend that I know all of us that are Detroiters that have lived here are so happy to see. So anyway, Barb's busy trying to organize that end of the move. And, so she sent me, and but these are her remarks. This is something she wrote out, and I had about a minute of my own at the end. So, Barbara Levin speaking here. I'm very honored to have been asked to speak at Flora's service, memorial service, for I feel very indebted to her and the Lamaze birth control method for the wonderful birth experiences of our 3 daughters. I think she meant with our 3 daughters, not of her 3 daughters. I don't know. The birth experiences of the daughters were that great, but her experiences were great. Very rarely do I edit Barbara. She usually edits me, but don't tell her I edit. In Flora's classes, she eliminated the fear of not using pain-reducing medication or procedures by explaining what would happen in each stage of labor and delivery, how to respond, and analyzing what was causing the sensations that we would experience. Her breakdown of the hardest part, the crowning of the baby's head, some, quote, some stretching together with a little burning, some stretching together with a little burning, actually made it very bearable when I had our first child, and I never considered anything but a natural childbirth for the next 2. But there's another major contribution that she made, and and that was the inclusion of the fathers in both the classes and their presence during labor and delivery. We have lived in a residential neighborhood on Capitol Hill in the District of Columbia for the last 36 years. We've seen many changes over the years, including more families choosing to live there. What has struck me is how often I see men out walking, often even alone, managing very young children, including carrying infants in the appropriate carrier. I believe, she says, bringing men into the childbirth experience has helped make such sights commonplace. Flora coached me during the births of our first two daughters, but by the third time, I felt confident that I could do it without coaching. While the birth of our first daughter was in a Detroit hospital, it allowed the husband in the delivery room as well as the labor room. For some reason, our doctor's practice moved to Beaumont Hospital, which did not allow fathers in the delivery room. But Carl was in the delivery room anyway. And this is how it happened. It was not by pulling rank, as you'll see. The birth was scheduled to be induced about a week before my due date because of an RH issue. So it went very slowly for quite a while. Eventually, our doctor went to make sure the delivery room would be ready. He took his time, and as things began to proceed rapidly, I told Carl to go find him and tell him to hurry up. While Carl was gone, I was doing what I was told to do in the transition stage, which is to resist the temptation to push. But at some point, I just couldn't hold back any longer, so I gave a big push, in the middle of which Carl was re-entering the room, saw what was happening, and ran back out to get help. I was alone when that push was over, and recognizing it for what I thought it was, lifted the blanket and took a look, and saw that the head was already partially out. I was exhilarated, she said. Then a resident and nurse came running in with Carl behind them. And the first thing the nurse did was tell Carl to leave, as the resident took charge of the remainder of the delivery. I objected, she said. And when she's been protecting me all of our life. And when our embarrassed doctor arrived, he told the nurse that Carl could come back in. But what happened then was really great. Even in hospitals that allowed fathers in the delivery room, the baby would be quickly taken, this is at that time, would be quickly taken by a nurse to be cleaned up and put in the nursery. But because this birth did not take place in a sterile environment, they weren't sure what to do with our baby. So they wrapped her in a blanket and gave her to me, and left Carl and me alone with her for quite a long time. It was wonderful. When I later told Flora about our experience, she got it and had me talk about it at a childbirth conference she held, where I told my story and suggested that time alone for both parents and the baby after the birth should be facilitated for others. That has happened now. So I'll always feel indebted to Flora for her role as a pioneer in a field that resulted in healthier births for women and their children, and contributed to a change in the relationship of many men to their young children. She ends with a thank you. Now, I've got a few comments that I want to add. This will be briefer than her remarks. One of Flora's kids, or Flora's babies, was to be with us tonight. And I don't see our daughter Kate here, but knowing her, she'll arrive at a perfect time. But her daughter, my granddaughter, Bess Levin Markell, is here. She's not covering for her mother, by the way. Her mother's supposed to be here. But anyway, I want to introduce and embarrass one of, I guess I could call it one of Flora's grandkids, I guess. This is Bess Levin Markell in the back of the room. Maybe should have warned her I was going to do that. One other just two other quick comments. An interesting battle occurred after this event Barb described. And that was my first experience. This would have been back in 1963. My first experience with hospital billing. That emergency room which we didn't use, excuse me, not the emergency room, the delivery room which we didn't use, was built because it was prepared. So mind you, the doctor wasn't in the room right at the moment, and the delivery room was never used. And we were sent a bill, or whatever it was. So, of course, I took umbrage at that. And so we had a battle with the hospital as to whether we should pay a bill for a room which was never used. I can't remember that the outcome of that gargantuan struggle over the building of a hospital, but nonetheless, it was my first experience. I understand then, and I understand many other ways, how exotic the building practices of hospitals can get. Other than that, I can tell you that, when Barb said she was exhilarated, you can imagine, try to imagine how exhilarated I was to see a child born that way. It was our third child at that point. I saw Bess's mother. She was born. That was my first experience. And I was in those classes that Flora held for the mothers and the fathers. I went fairly religiously, not that she was particularly religious, I probably shouldn't use that word, but I went probably regularly, I should say, to her classes, the Lamaze Method, learned an awful lot, and felt that I was really part of the birth. So that's an experience, obviously, that mothers will never forget, the birth experience. Probably some of the kids would rather forget it. I'm sure it's not easy for the babies. But the fathers who participated and who have gone into the delivery rooms and have gone through labor with their wives or their loved ones surely can never forget the experience which Flora made possible for me. So I'll always be in debt to her. And by the way, also for that great social activism of hers. If I can put in a plug for social activism, she was truly involved in it. And in a way, I think her leadership with the Lamaze Method was kind of part of her social activism. It was part of change. She helped to produce a really important change for this community, and we'll always be in her debt. We remember her fondly, and Barb, again, thanks you so much for inviting her to give you the remarks, and I'll tell Kate what she missed. Thank you. I'm happy to keep a dinner date, which I thought I had with my daughter and my granddaughter. Thanks and congratulations.
Thank you so much. Thanks. As we were organizing this event, I know that Claudia and Louis thought a great deal about who might be good people to bring to the podium to talk about the impact and the legacy that Flora Hommel has left behind. And so it's my great pleasure to introduce Judith Cawhorn, who has both probably the honor of having been a student of Flora's, but then also converted that into being a teacher and herself as an activist of some note. So with that, I'll introduce and have her come to the podium. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, everybody can hear me okay? Yes. Great. Well, I'm so honored to be here today to represent the voice of so many women that were profoundly impacted because of Flora's heroic efforts that brought the Lamaze Method of painless childbirth to the greater Detroit community. As I thought about what to share in the brief time I have with you today, I wondered how I would be able to talk about Flora without talking about my own personal transformation, because these two are so intertwined. Then it struck me that who I am today is in very large part because of the opportunity I had not only to be empowered by the experience of the birth of my son Troy in 1970 and my daughter Dina in 1973 using the Lamaze Method of painless childbirth, but also because I was mentored and challenged by Flora to take control of my life overall. For Flora, as passionate as she was about CWPEA, CWPEA, we fondly called it CWPEA, sort of like sweet pea, as we so fondly called it, the childbirth movement she started was a part of a larger social justice cause, and that was the empowerment of women in society as a whole, and working class women in particular. It is fitting on many levels that Flora's papers are housed here in the Reuther Library. It is significant that when Flora studied under Dr. Ferdinand Lamaze in Paris in the early 50s, he was on staff at the Metal Workers Union Hospital. He created and introduced the psychoprophylactic method of painless childbirth to union workers' families. Thank you, Claudia. And although, like him, Flora wanted women of all socioeconomic backgrounds to have the opportunity to experience birth differently, she was most passionate about empowering those who came from working class families. You see, I was one of those women. My mother was a UAW member who worked in the trim plant at Ford Motor Company in Highland Park. I'd gotten married young and had not gone on to formal higher education when Flora tapped me to become one of the few non-nursing lay instructors for CWPEA. I'm not sure whether Flora had read at that time the Brazilian education activist Paulo Freire's book, Pedagogy of the Oppressed, but she certainly was committed to the belief that people of the same experiences are some of the best teachers, a revolutionary idea at the time for sure. That opportunity to teach was one of the pivotal experiences in my life that allowed me to believe that I could go on and do almost anything. The belief in the power of peer voices is why she also had expected parents read as they were waiting for class to begin. Personal stories written by former students, and they were on this onion skin paper. And we each had to do our dues by typing some of those on the very clunky typewriters. And now those stories are part of the collection of Flora's work archived right here. When she returned to Detroit, her experience in Paris was her impetus for going on to nursing school here at Wayne State and starting to teach Lamaze classes. When I mentioned Flora's heroic efforts, that was a purposeful statement. What you need to understand is the courage and tenacity it took for Flora to go to physicians in the Detroit area, one by one, and get them to take a risk at trying something different and allowing her to be their teacher and guide. Can you even imagine the pushback, rejection, and anger that she experienced? She never backed down on what she knew to be the key aspects of the method. It went on to later lead the battle against a wave of interventions that began to appear in hospitals that not only jeopardized women's opportunities for a healthy childbirth experience, but actually put them at risk. I want to close with this quote from the feminist poet, Audrey Lorde, that I think sums up Flora's approach to her work and life. I was going to die sooner or later, whether or not I had even spoken myself. My silences had not protected me. Your silences will not protect you. I began to ask each time, what's the worst that could happen to me if I tell the truth? Our speaking out will irritate some people, get us called bitchy or hypersensitive, and disrupt some dinner parties. And then our speaking out will permit other women to speak until laws are changed and lives are saved and the world is altered forever. Next time, ask, what's the worst that will happen? Then push yourself a little further than you dare. Once you start to speak, people will yell at you. They will interrupt you, put you down and suggest it's personal. And the world won't end. And the speaking will get easier and easier. And you will find you have fallen in love with your own vision, which you may never have realized you had. And you will lose some friends and lovers and realize you don't miss them. And new ones will find you and cherish you. And you will still flirt and paint your nails, dress up and party. Because as I think Emma Goldman said, if you can't dance, I don't want to be part of your revolution. And at last, you'll know with surpassing certainty that only one thing is more frightening than speaking your truth, and that is not speaking. Flora, I and 18,000 other women are so glad you did not keep silent. For that, we thank you. 45 years ago, in this brochure with my daughter Dina. And here I am with a very successful life. Thanks to Flora.
That's the kind of speaker that I always want to be, is that kind of speaker. Wonderful comments and remarks. Also, we have a job for you if you want to work with some archives, because you seem very familiar with the records already. So.
Okay, that's great.
The next speaker on our program comes from here at Wayne State University, and to give us another analysis of the impact that Flora has, I have the honor of introducing Dr. Marsha Richmond to come and make a few comments.
Well, hello. I was completely unaware, unlike our two previous speakers, of Flora Hommel's life when Dr. Lewis Jones contacted me earlier in the summer to ask whether, as a historian of women in science and medicine, that I might be able to give a few remarks that would provide a little bit of an overview of Flora's work. Well, I first read Susan Broman's wonderful biographical piece on Flora, and after doing so, I felt like I knew her. She was very much like the other women who are geneticists that I study, and who also worked in the 1950s and 60s. So I felt like I knew her. Like many of the geneticists I study, particularly if you know Barbara Mcclintock, who eventually received a Nobel Prize for her work, and Rachel Carson, who probably would have received a Nobel Prize had she lived. She was bright, confident, and willing to sacrifice for a cause she believed in. And while we celebrate the women of the 1960s who are part of the second wave of feminism, we overlook, I think, the women of the earlier generation who set the stage for the work that came and became possible in the 60s and 70s, and that's where I would place Flora Hommel. Well, let me provide just that overview of how she fits into the nexus of women in medicine and obstetrics. When Hommel began to promote the Lamaze Method of childbirth in the early and late 1950s here in Detroit, she was taking part in quite a new movement. Since time immemorial, women, of course, have been involved in childbirth and in helping other women in childbirth. And as we know from the diary of a late 18th century midwife, Martha Ballard, and if you've never seen the wonderful movie that was made of the book by, done by the historian Laura Thatcher Ulrich called The Midwife's Tale, I can highly recommend it. It's a lovely piece. But we know from that that Laura Ballard was a much venerated member of her community for her work in midwifery. But we also know that around 1800, she and other women, midwives, were being pushed out as medicine was beginning to professionalize, and male doctors began to claim the area of obstetrics. In newly settled territories like Michigan at the time, for example, midwives were still important. But as medicine progressed along the line of professionalization in the 19th century with medical schools, women increasingly face obstacles in getting a medical education. A few were admitted to some of the irregular schools, like the eclectics and the homeopaths. But particularly after 1910, when the Flexner Report appeared, women were really marginalized from medicine. There was a quote, I think, of maybe 10% of a medical school could be women. And really, they were channeled into nursing as a profession. Now, nursing is a venerable profession itself, and of course, Flora was able to partake of that and did some wonderful work in the area. But many women wanted to become physicians. And in the area of childbirth, even women midwives were marginalized. As Broman relates the count of Flora's mother and aunt, and as we just heard, the childbirth for women in the 40s, my mother, for example, was very similar. Men were the obstetricians, women were frequently knocked out with anesthetic, and then they awoke to have a baby next to them. This was a strange experience to somebody like Martha Ballard. Well, Flora Hommel's dedication to the principles and methods of Ferdinand Lamaze for painless childbirth was very much then a part of a new movement in which women took back their bodies, control over their bodies, control over birthing experiences and other natural processes. Of course, the path was not easy. We've heard a little bit about that. But Hommel, like other members of her generation, persisted. So it's a great pleasure for me, as someone who practiced the Lamaze Method of childbirth in 1981, and then as a new grandmother of 2 months, where my daughter has absolutely no idea about the people who made her childbirthing experience possible. So I'm very happy to have to be able to participate in this event, and to know that Flora Hommel's papers here at the Reuther are going to do very great work in allowing future researchers to understand and place this movement in a wider perspective, in which I think it's very interesting that Detroit was really at the center of this brand new movement here in the United States. Thank you.
I don't want to expend a lot of energy on my final introduction. I think many people in the room know Claudia. She has certainly been the driving force in today's event, but also in the work to continue awareness of the legacy that Flora has had throughout the world. And so without further ado, I'll ask Claudia Hommel to come to the microphone.
Yes, I think what we're going to do, I've had the pleasure of digging out of the archives 2 films that my mother was deeply involved with. One was a French film that she would show year after year, hundreds of film showings of a film called Naissance. And she would stand up there while it was being shown, and she would give you the simultaneous translation, because that's what she was very good at. And in fact, she had translated for Paul Robeson at the first World Peace Congress in Paris, which is one of the reasons why we have Paul Robeson over there, because my mother was a great believer in his vision and was very honored to have helped translate for him. But she also thought they should have a movie of their own that would be something that came out of the experience with her American students, and they created a film called American Naissance. The film was made by Wilberg, who turns out he's well, he was a very good friend of my family, and his second wife was pregnant. And so not only is he a filmmaker, but he's the father in the movie. And we have a print of this, just got it digitized yesterday, and I made a little clip of it, about 6 minutes long. Now, those of you who have never seen a live birth and the crowning of a baby's head, you're in for a treat. So, go ahead and play it, and I'm going to bring this microphone to there. So.
I had two things before, turning it off, and I thought there must be a better way. I like the idea that Jim will be with me. Sure, who would you rather have there than your husband?
I wanted to be there, but I didn't know there was anything I could do. I can help.
Our doctor said it's better for the baby.
Well, I read Thank You, Dr. Lamaze, and that did it for me. Yes, psychoprophylactic is often referred to as the Lamaze Method. Actually, it was first used in the Soviet Union. Dr. Lamaze brought it to France in 1951, and he further developed it. He saw in it a real triumph for the woman. His colleague, Dr. Valet, carries on Dr. Lamaze's work, and the method is spreading around the world. I studied with Flora Hommel, who was in Paris when they began. She studied with Dr. Lamaze and Dr. Valet. Since then, she's worked to promote the method in the United States. Remember, psycho, mind, prophylaxis, prevention, mind prevention of pain. This method is extremely effective in reducing or eliminating pain in childbirth. The thousands of women who have been through our classes prove it. But the most important part is the positive conditioning. You've heard all your life that childbirth is pain. You've heard it in tales you've been told, stories you've read, movies you've seen, religious concepts, even the words labor pains. All these may have conditioned you to feel that labor equals pain. During labor, muscles of the uterus contract or tighten, just like any other muscle, and you have a feeling of tightening. But if you think that this is labor contraction, your conditioning may say this equals pain. What we must do then is to recondition you to expect contraction and to respond with relaxing and breathing patterns. But is it possible to overcome the conditioning of a lifetime in just a few weeks? Sharon, can you answer that?
I had my first baby by the method, and it was very successful. I had my doubts too, but if it can work for me, it can work for anybody.
And it worked for me, that's why I'm here. Every time you practice, you're conditioning yourself that childbirth is relaxation. Childbirth is breathing in certain patterns. Childbirth is a wonderful participating experience. Quick inhalation, slow, steady exhale. What could he do for backache?
Push on her back.
What else might you expect? Well, a strong urge to push. That's right, but you're not fully dilated, so it's too soon to push. What can you do to prevent yourself from pushing?
Stay relaxed and blow out.
All right. Now, for our rehearsal, we'll assume that you're progressing very rapidly and the desire to push becomes continuous during contraction. So what will you do?
Do the pan-pan blow throughout.
Good. Now I'd like you to do it on your side. Contraction begins. Take a deep breath. Exhale. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Blow. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Blow. Back. All right, now the transition period, just before complete dilatation, is the most difficult part of your labor. But it's also the shortest. Support from your husband and from your monitriced, if you have one, is very important here. And after transition comes a much more enjoyable pushing stage. All right, a pushing contraction. Take a breath in, let it out. Another breath in, let it out. Inhale, hold it, push, push, push.
Okay, girl. Yes, of course. Come on.
Everything you got behind it. Everything you got, as hard as you can.
Go. No meter at a time. Can you see the baby in my glasses?
And it keeps feeling better. This is right here. This is as soon as you learn to work with it, it gets better and better and better.
Remember when it's pounding, I'll tell you to stop it. Remember?
You know, she's real good at that. A contraction. Don't push, 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 push. Come on, sweetie. Push, push, push. Think open. Come on, darling. Push, 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 push. Hard as you can. Come on, come on. You're moving a little more. Come on. This is a good one. This is a good one. Come on, come on, come on, come on.
Everybody's pushing?
Isn't she gorgeous? Oh,
Good size baby, too. She's been in there long enough to grow.
There's more where that comes from. I hope you liked that.
In today's world, looking at it from today's world, I want those guys to get out of there. I mean, they have no business being in there. It should be a woman's thing altogether.
Now, wait a minute.
Right. Only the father. Okay, the father.
I will have the debate afterwards. No, I think Wilbur was very glad to be at the birth of his daughter, Phoebe.
You know, Claudia, I have a comment about that.
Yes.
It's a very salient point. When I talked about Flora holding on to the principles, Flora was very clear about the role of the father. He was not the coach that became later the coach. He was there to support the woman. It was encouraged, if you could, to have a monitriced who would be your person telling you what to do and interacting. The husband was there. Whatever was needed from the perspective of the woman being in control, and that was really clear. It was a whole different thing. And then, over time, as men will do, they began to usurp that role and become the coaches, and the Bradley Method took on the coaches, and they did the counting, and they did the, but they would, swab your forehead, or go down the hall and check on the doctor. They did all those things. So she was clear about that, and it was a very different role than what has happened over time, so.
You have a story to tell. You'll have to wait.
Okay.
I'm always telling my husband to wait. That's Cappy Kid over there. He's the reason why I'm still in one piece. So, I am my mother's daughter, which means I'm equally feisty, persistent, stubborn, pig-headed, often at loggerheads with my mother, and fiercely proud of her and for all that she accomplished and all that she tried to accomplish. Flora had a second birth after I was born. 3 years later, a girl was born and died prematurely within a few hours of the birth. But I never felt like I was an only child. I was surrounded by pregnant women and babies, and many, many babies, young babies. But, my mother did believe in a woman's right to choose. So the fact that I didn't want to have my own kids, she sort of had to swallow and say, okay, I suppose that's your choice, because she really wanted grandchildren. And frankly, I would have loved to have had the childbirth experience. I'm so jealous when I've partnered for a couple of my friends at their births. I just didn't want to have the responsibility for the next 18 years. And it doesn't end at 18. You know, if you look at the displays that are here at these side tables, there's a quote from, I think, a Detroit News article in 1989. They're quoting Flora. "I'm interested in what's best for all people. That's what life is about. Trying to make things better for people from the beginning to the end of their lives." And I'll say that my mother had Alzheimer's, and she was diagnosed here at Wayne State Medical Center in 2002. And she was in for a ride, and she understood that. And she involved me in that process early on so that I could help her. And what I thought was so amazing, and I wish there were some people here from the nursing home where she was for the last 3 years, she ran that place. She ran it. She had gone the first day she arrived, she says to them, because she still had a little bit of language left, she said, "I was a nurse," and she scrubs and she follows the nurses on their rounds. Her favorite place on the whole floor was the nurses' station, and she would take papers and wrinkle them up and pour orange juice on them or whatever. But she was totally in charge the entire time she was there. And like I said, she was feisty and stubborn and persistent, and sometimes they would just have to restrain her. "Okay, Flora, that's enough." But I think one of the things that I wanted to try to figure out is what made her make the decision at the age of 24 to study with Dr. Lamaze and commit herself to a process that was going to be arduous in every respect. My mother was not a great student. She had trouble reading thick books. I'm not sure if it was really dyslexia, but it was a kind of difficulty of reading through. And here at Wayne State, the College of Nursing, she had a chem professor who was out to get her. Totally was going to make her flunk that class. And she just hunkered down for the battle and went through that chem textbook, page, paragraph, line by line, so that she could pass and get that nursing degree that she needed, not because she had to be a nurse to do what she knew about childbirth. She had to be a nurse so that she could talk to those doctors and those hospitals and convince them that this was the way they had to go. And so she did. And she was, I know Marilyn Foley is here from her graduating class from 1958. And she was a star amongst them. And she was a little older. By the time she graduated, she's 27, 28 years old. She'd already had her babies. My joy was in going to wedding after wedding after wedding, and there were babies being born, and these were some of Flora's very first students, were her classmates. And they were also some of her first teachers and monitrices. I don't know, is Jeanette Conrad here? Jeanette, I hope you'll have a chance to talk to us about this. Also a graduate from 1958, was one of her first students and became a teacher and monitrice. So I was trying to understand what made my mother a social activist, because that's what it was. She was going to have to do battle in a deeply political way. And I was asking my cousin today, what do you remember about our grandparents? Because I didn't have the impression that they were particularly, social fighters. My grandfather was very proud to be a union electrician here in Detroit. He was working at Stroh's, and in fact, every time we passed the Fisher building, my mother would point, until even just a couple of years ago, she would point to the top and say, "Your grandpa put those lights up there." And yet, he was a loudmouth. In fact, rumor has it, according to the family, that he was hired by the Tigers to sit behind the dugout and razz the opposing team. And as a result, he was given the honor of hosting Hank Greenberg, the first of the Jewish baseball players, to have kosher dinner at the house. But that doesn't quite explain Flora's social activism. My grandmother, I learned, was a Rosie the Riveter. She worked during the war at Willow Run at the airplane factory. But yeah, she smoked cigarettes on the side and would cook bacon when Grandpa was not around. But she was not particularly an out there women's rights activist. She just lived that life. And then she's back at home being a housewife. I think the big change for my mother happened when she went to Paris. She's 18 years old. She gets married to this nice Detroit guy who has intellectual aspirations, wants to be a composer, and they go off to Paris. He's been discharged originally in France and picked up a music scholarship, comes back to Detroit, marries her, and takes her off to Paris, which is a great relief because she and my grandmother were at loggerheads. I think that the feisty comes from that side of the family. And she learns French, and she takes charge of bringing in the extra money, because my dad's on a scholarship, there's not much happening. She takes a series of jobs. She ends up teaching English at the Berlitz School. And she has this life-changing experience. She gives birth in a joyful and painless way. And she's ecstatic about it. The Grantley Degreed method works. It's a method to relax. It works. And all of her friends try, they read the book, they try it, and it doesn't work. And she's baffled. Wait, why is this not working? What happened in my birth experience that was so incredible that needs to get translated? And then Dr. Lamaze, happening to come back from the Soviet Union with Pavlovian vocabulary, is setting up shop at the Metallurgical Union Clinic, and my mother goes to him and says, I need to know what it is you do, because I know childbirth can be painless. And that dedication, I don't know what happened that made her say, I will now dedicate the rest of my life to this. And not just this alone. She's in France for 7 years during a period in the United States that is a silencing, censoring period of time. During the McCarthy witch hunts, people are afraid to talk about the fight against racism, the fight against war, the fight for unions. But my parents are over in France and they're talking nonstop. There's political forums every week. The American expats are having their forums and everyone's talking politics. When they get back to Detroit in 1953, the middle of 1953, they didn't know from McCarthyism. And so they kept talking. And they found themselves hanging out with the civil libertarians like Goodman and Philo and Robb and Maurice Sugar. And they're hanging out with people who are fighting for black rights, like Charles Hill. And they're hanging out with known communists, like Hal Shapiro and Jack White and Carl Winter and others. And they're not afraid. And in the midst of this, my mother's hitting those textbooks and putting together a program that's going to have a huge impact on women, not just in Detroit. Everywhere in this country. If you know the word Lamaze, there were 2 women responsible for that. Marjorie Carmel, when she published her book, Thank You, Dr. Lamaze, and Flora Hommel, because she was out there beating the bushes, training teachers, training monitrices, helping to build childbirth education associations all around the country. And for that, what a great life. I really want to thank you for all coming. There's some time for some other people to come up and say a few words. I would love that. Before you leave, we didn't set up a guest list. I would love for you to all leave me your name, your phone number, and your email address, because I want to stay in touch with you wonderful people. But also, James Wright here, our videographer, is ready to just take you aside and capture you speaking to your own experiences in whatever manner your associations with Flora have been. If you are able to make a contribution in her memory here at Wayne State at the archives, that will help us pay for the digitizing the films and the process of making this event possible and continuing to put out the word. I think this collection isn't just about sociology. I think this collection is going to be for nurses and doctors and lay people to reinvigorate the Lamaze method and take it back from all those doctors and hospitals who co-opted it starting in the 80s and 90s. And we have the records here that tell them how to do that. So thank you very, very much. And I'll open the floor for some other folks to make comments.
Hi, I'm Kathy, and somebody made, I think you made the comment about the new world that we live in and the role of men in parenting and so forth. Claudia and I live in a neighborhood in Chicago that's a port of entry. There's 41 languages spoken in our neighborhood, and parts of the neighborhood are fairly tough. And I was walking home from the train one day, and there were two Latino guys in front of me. They were talking, and they're the kind of guys that strike fear in your heart. Tattoos, muscular, earring, bandana, each of them, you know, kind of a do-rag, and they were walking and talking. And I said, I don't want to cross these guys, you know. I don't want them looking cross-eyed at me. They look really, really tough as they push their baby carriages along down the sidewalk.
Michele Artt.
I'm the daughter of one of those radicals who Claudia befriended and worked with. In fact, my father was in prison for 4 years during the McCarthy period. But I think in looking back, Claudia was Flora was a good friend of mine. My mother was the operator of not the owner, the operator of Global Bookstore, and Flora's books by the huge boxload came through Global Books. So I knew of her in that manner. Being quite a bit younger, I didn't have much other association except when I heard that she had been in Paris at the time of the founding of the World Peace Council and translating for the beloved Paul Robeson. I realized why she was continuing in her work for peace. And she was a member of the U.S., the Michigan chapter of the U.S. Peace Council for years, for the whole time that existed, which was, I believe, 20 years. She was active in the civil rights movement, helping raise money for the lawyers and the organizing of people and getting their right to vote in the South. And lawyers' fees and their requirements of filing papers certainly must have cost a lot, but she was involved in that. I think that her Childbirth Without Pain, and I was one of her student patients at the time, later in life, but all of these aspects of her life were because of her real treasure of human beings and their right to have free and healthy quality of life. You know, nothing has been said really about her work with John Conyers and his 676 bill for universal health care, which preceded, and we say now with love, Obamacare. Every time I was at a meeting with her, she talked about the new development with Congressman Conyers and and the move for universal health care. But her caring about human beings and their lives, their quality of life, no matter their race, their religion, their political persuasion, really drove her in all of these areas. It was not just childbirth without pain. And I know very well that she would have been on the line with the National Nurses Association just, I believe, today, in their demonstration here in Michigan, in Detroit, for quality of life, the right to organize, to raise wages, and to guarantee the health of everyone. Thank you.
I would be remiss if I did not read the statement that John Conyers sent. He was hoping to be here, and I don't know if you're following world politics, but he's been to Africa this week with Obama. So he wrote to the family, but I will extend that to all of us here. I extend my deepest condolences on the loss of your dear loved one. Please know that my thoughts and prayers are with you during this difficult time. During her many years of service, Ms. Hommel exemplified significant contributions of social and economic practices, not only to our community, but to our country as a whole. She had a passion to pursue policies that would promote fairness and equal treatment to help the most disadvantaged within our society. She also worked to shape an environment that would create opportunity and a better way of life for others. I will always be appreciative of her courage, dedication, and support. Ms. Hommel will be remembered for her leadership, wisdom, and commitment. The loss of her presence will surely impact those who knew her. She leaves behind many friends and a loving family with memories and lessons of life that are of timeless value. Sincerely, John Conyers, Jr.
Thank you. My name is Randy Block, and I had the pleasure of working with Flora since 1988 when she joined the board of directors for the Grey Panthers of Metro Detroit. And so I learned from her, and I learned that she was more, well, first of all, I would say that there's a common saying among nurses that doctors are for curing, but nurses are for caring. And I think Flora, being a nurse, she cared, in addition to caring about the Lamaze Method, she cared about that whole group of people who had no health insurance in this country. And health care for all, as was mentioned by the last two speakers or referenced, was her true passion. And I got to know, sit down, and we met on a monthly basis in different people's homes to plan how are we going to somehow educate the public that we need health care for all. And Flora and I worked on a postcard. This is the boilerplate for a postcard that we were going to have people sign their names and send it off to their members of Congress. And I did attend the session that happened just this morning at Central United Methodist Church, calling for Medicare for All, which is the new name for Conyers H.R. 676. But I thought, in addition to mentioning that Flora was quite the activist with Grey Panthers and was always a spark plug for that, I thought it might be of some interest to you to hear what she and I put together as a message for members of Congress on health care for all. Because I think, again, Flora was not just about, look what I've done. She's more about, look what we need for for every person. Everyone has a right to have health care. So this is what Flora and I put together. Dear member of Congress, the United States is the only industrialized country in the world that does not provide health care as a right for all of its people. Our health care system, in quotes, is expensive, but it's ranked 37th after Costa Rica by the World Health Organization in overall health system performance. Well, healthcare costs continue to skyrocket, and fortunately they're not quite skyrocketing as much in the last 2 or 3 years. Fewer people get coverage. As families lose their jobs and health care coverage, small businesses go bankrupt. More people die prematurely. In the U.S., 24% of our health care dollars are spent on administration, twice that of countries that do not cover all their people. Profits go to the wealthy, not for needed care. Please help by working for passage of single-payer legislation H.R. 676, introduced by Representative John Conyers, Jr., and co-sponsored by Representative Jim McDermott, Dennis Kucinich, and Donna Christensen. So you can see from that message, and I considered myself a pretty good writer, having a degree in journalism and I'm a community organizer by training, but she said, no, we've got to tighten this up, we've got to make this change. So this has clearly got Flora's fingerprints on it. But I just want you to know, too, it hasn't been mentioned that she was inducted into the Women's Hall of Fame, and it's probably somewhere in the other archives here. But she truly was an advocate for not only health care, but women's rights, for civil rights, and for human rights and human dignity and peace. So I would appreciate the opportunity to be able to say a few words on behalf of Flora.
I definitely am not a speaker and never was a teacher in Lamaze because I don't do that kind of thing. My teaching is more one-on-one. But Claudia asked me if I would say just a few words as one of the first monitrices. Flora and I first met each other as nursing students here at Wayne. We went into our clinical work with 37 students. We graduated 13 2.5 years later after we finished. You can see with that attrition rate that none of us had an especially easy time, but we all knew that Flora had a more difficult time. Not only was she a little older, she was married, and heaven forbid she had a daughter, and the college was not in tune with that kind of thing. So she really did have a difficult time. And I think I know the chemistry teacher that you were talking about. She was a stinker. Hardly any of us, I'm sure, knew exactly what area we were going to be working when we graduated and finished all of our clinicals. Flora, on the other hand, there was never any doubt. We heard Dr. Lamaze, Dr. Ballet, and childbirth on breaks, at lunch, and the whole time. Our class was divided into two halves, and she was in my half, so we really got to know her in those 2.5 years. Hopefully, I don't know if anybody is here from the college right now, but hopefully that attitude the dean. Hopefully that attitude has changed. I promise. Good, because that was not nice. Soon after graduation, she began teaching classes, and they were held in her home on Snowden, yes, in the living room, and the classes were kept small. And this was to help facilitate people getting to know each other, and especially the guys, because I think the women were all excited and the guys were had a little fear and trepidation kind of thing. But they were able to get to know each other and to talk. And if somebody should deliver early, maybe before their due date, they would come back and tell the group what was going on and what had happened and how their experience had been. We delivered our first child in July of 1960. And Flora got to the hospital about the same time that we did. And she was there throughout the delivery. Everything was going well until I got a cramp in my leg during transition, and I panicked. Now, I'm not usually the kind of person who panics much, but I had had severe cramps during my pregnancy and missed a day's work, and it really threw me. Now, my husband was into sports and was familiar with leg cramps and that, so he worked on my cramp in my leg and got rid of that. But Flora very calmly got me back on track and helped me to relax and to do what I was supposed to be doing. And we went on to have a great delivery. And that was one of the things that I tried to do with all the deliveries once I started monitricing. About a year later, she kept after me, when are you going to come? When are you going to come? And finally, a year later, I did start. As a monitrist, I think one of our main functions was to be there for the mother, and the dad too, but basically for the mother. We were there throughout the delivery. We were there, we tried to get there at about the same time that they did. And we stayed with them, whether it was 2 hours or 22 hours, and there was more than once when I was there over 24 hours. But hospital staff kind of comes and goes. They've got other responsibilities. And at that time, there were no 12-hour shifts, it was 8 hours. And so if a woman was there for more than 8 hours, she had different people coming in. And with all the interns and externs and residents and attendings, there were a lot of people coming in. And it was our responsibility to be with her, for her. And they knew that we were there for them and that we weren't going to be leaving. We provided coaching and support. We could do, back rubs, do whatever it was that they needed at the time. And we also could explain what the doctors and some of the nursing staff were saying. They would come in and say, well, you're this or you're that, or this is going on. And they didn't have a clue what was being said, but they were too embarrassed or maybe too tired or too frightened to ask. And so we were there to help them out with that. The second part of our job, I felt, was to educate the staff as to what our purpose was. They had to know that we weren't just somebody in off the street who was interested in childbirth and wanted to come in and do something. That we were professionals who knew what was going on in labor and delivery. That we were capable of monitoring contractions and heart tones. This was before the days of fetal heart monitors. And I'm really glad that it was, because I think sometimes heart monitors have proven to be more of a problem and have caused more cesarean sections to be done. But anyway, we had to show them that we were there to help the woman and to make this a good experience, and that we were capable of doing that. And I think gradually, over a period of time, a lot of the doctors got to trust us and to accept the fact that we knew what we were doing and we weren't there to take over for them. I remember a friend of ours went into labor, or was going to labor with her last child. She definitely was going to be their last. And she was going to New Grace, which at the time, husbands could not get in the delivery room. Now, she had had her child before with the method. I had been with her with that one. Her doctor was not one who was real excited about the method to begin with, but over the years he had kind of gradually come around a little bit. I had been with her, like I say, with the one before, so he knew me, and I had been with him for a couple of other deliveries with other people, and I think one of the other monitrices had also been with him. And so he kind of mellowed, and he actually let her deliver in the room that was just outside of the labor and delivery area, with the understanding that if anything, the least little thing went wrong, we would immediately be in the labor and delivery. But everything went well. She had a wonderful experience, and after she delivered, she went back to recovery room, and everything was fine. I know that Flora, that we, and I'm speaking of Flora, and the other monitrices and the teachers and all the volunteers with CWPEA have made a difference in the way women were treated in childbirth. When we were students, I remember one doctor, and I won't quote what he actually said, but what he wanted was when one of his patients came in, they were to be medicated immediately. And they were using what was called twilight sleep, which was a combination of drugs. And the majority of women were knocked out. They had no recollection at all of what was going on. Others had horrible memories of what was going on. I remember one patient that I had tried to get out of bed every time she had a contraction. We didn't have to time her with a watch or put our hand on her abdomen to feel the contraction. She just tried to get out of bed every time, had no recollection of it the next day. And then when his patients were completely dilated, he would use forceps and literally drag the babies out. and there were so many forceps marks and unnecessary marks on the infants' faces. Such a difference now. I read recently where Beaumont had a new delivery area, birthing center, where just about anybody can get into the labor rooms now, and the delivery rooms, where it was just an impossible thing almost. And I know that Flora did so much work, and a lot of the couples in the CWPEA also worked and in different hospitals with the doctors and with administration, tried with them. And it was a privilege to know Flora, to call her a friend, and you were at our wedding too. And I was just so happy to have been able to work with her and be a part of this movement.
Well, I want to thank everyone for coming out tonight. There are still refreshments out in the hallway. I would encourage you to have another bite to eat and visit with each other. I know it's difficult when there's one podium for people to connect together. But thank you again for coming out, and thank you very much for sharing with me, someone who didn't know Flora Hommel, the breadth and length of her life and the impact that she's had. So have a good evening. Thank you.